There are moments when heaven feels quiet, too quiet. You pray, but nothing moves. You cry out, but no answer comes. You wonder if your words are just bouncing off the ceiling. And in that silence, a painful question creeps in. Where is God? You're not alone in that question. The silence of God can feel like absence, like distance, but it's not rejection. It's an invitation. Because God's silence doesn't mean He's not working. It often means He's working deeper. Think of Job. He lost everything. His friends gave bad advice. His prayers went unanswered. But through all of it, God was present, even when he was silent. And in the end, Job didn't just get answers. He got revelation. He said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." That's the power of silence. It's not a punishment. It's a space. A sacred space where God shapes your faith, not by giving easy answers, but by building trust that's unshakable. In the silence, God is asking, will you still follow when you can't hear me? Will you still trust when you can't feel me? Anyone can worship when prayers are answered. But real faith grows when nothing makes sense and you stay anyway. Silence is not a wall, it's a doorway. And those who walk through it don't come out the same. Maybe God is being quiet right now, not because He's far, but because He's near, and teaching you how to hear Him not in the noise, but in the stillness. So don't walk away. Lean in. He is there, even when He says nothing. But let's be honest, the silence still hurts. It leaves space for doubt. It stirs up old fears. And if we're not careful, we begin to believe silence means God is gone, or worse, uninterested. But silence is not absence. It's intimacy without noise. Think about the people closest to you. The deeper the relationship, the less you need words to feel connection. You can sit in silence with someone you trust. It's the same with God. He's not always loud. Sometimes, He's just near, so near. He doesn't need to speak to prove He's with you. And in those quiet seasons, God is preparing something. Think of a seed underground. There's no sound, no movement you can see, but growth is happening. Roots are spreading. Foundations are forming. That's what God is doing in your silence. Because you don't just need answers. You need roots, and roots don't grow in noise. They grow in stillness, in waiting, in trust. God's silence is sacred ground. It's where you stop performing and start surrendering. It's where you stop chasing feelings and start anchoring in truth. If He's silent, maybe He's trying to teach you to listen differently, not with your ears, but with your spirit. Not for signs, but for His presence. So don't give up in the quiet. God speaks most clearly to those who don't run from silence, but sit in it long enough to hear the whisper. Here's the thing no one likes to say out loud. Silence exposes us. It brings up the questions we've buried. It confronts the parts of our faith that were built on feelings, not truth. It reveals whether we trusted God or just trusted the experience of feeling close to Him. And that's uncomfortable because we want clarity, emotion, a sign. But what if God is after something more permanent than feelings? In the silence, your foundation is tested, not to destroy your faith, but to deepen it. You don't grow strong when everything feels perfect. You grow strong when everything feels still, and you stay anyway. That's what makes silence sacred. It's not just an empty space. It's a spiritual furnace, where your trust is refined, where your motives are purified, where your worship becomes less about what you feel and more about who He is. Because if you can worship in silence, You can worship in anything. If you can trust when there's no answer, then your trust is real. That's why the silence matters, not because it's pleasant, but because it's necessary. God's not punishing you. He's inviting you to go deeper than the surface, deeper than the feelings, deeper than the noise. He's teaching you to recognize His presence, even when He's quiet. Think about it. God was silent for 400 years between the Old and New Testaments. No prophets, no visions, no fresh words, just silence. But that silence wasn't neglect. It was set up. It was the calm before the arrival of the Word made flesh. It was heaven holding its breath before the breakthrough. And maybe that's where you are right now, in between what God last said and what He's about to do. We panic in the quiet because we assume God isn't moving. But the truth is, God often moves most when we see least. You're not stuck. You're being still. You're not abandoned. You're being anchored. What feels like silence might actually be preparation. God isn't absent. He's aligning. He's shaping you to be able to carry what He's preparing to give. And if He spoke every time you asked, you might lean on the voice more than the relationship. That's why silence matters, because it reveals what your faith is really in: God's hand or His heart, His answers or His presence. The silence is where you stop chasing signs and start clinging to truth. And in that place, faith stops being a feeling and becomes a fire. Here's what silence does. It separates surface faith from rooted trust. Anyone can believe when prayers are answered. But what about when they're not? When God says nothing for weeks, months, maybe years? Will you still follow? Still show up? Still trust? This is where real faith is born. Not in goosebumps, not in clear signs, but in the resolve to stay when the feelings fade. The silence doesn't mean God isn't speaking. It means He's speaking in a different way. Through scripture that doesn't feel loud, but still cuts deep. Through the quiet strength to get out of bed again. Through the peace that shouldn't be there, but is. That's His voice too. He doesn't always shout. Sometimes He lets the stillness grow you because He knows you're not being punished. You're being prepared. Prepared for a deeper love, a sturdier hope, a faith that can't be shaken by silence, because it's rooted in something unbreakable. What if the silence isn't God withholding, but inviting? Inviting you to ask better questions. Not just, God, where are you? But, who am I becoming in this waiting? What have I started to depend on more than Him? What does it mean to love Him when He feels far? Silence has a way of revealing what comfort hides. It shows you where your faith ends and where surrender begins. Because real surrender is quiet. It's not loud worship or passionate declarations. It's sitting still when you don't have the answers and saying, even now, I'm not walking away. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means space. Holy, stretching space where your soul learns the language of trust. Not trust in a result. Not trust in timing. But trust in God Himself. That kind of faith can't be shaken. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what He's forming in you right now. Sometimes, God's silence feels like rejection, like maybe you missed something, did something wrong, fell too far. But that's not how grace works. Grace stays when you doubt. Grace doesn't back away when you question. Grace walks with you through the valley of uncertainty, even when you can't feel its presence. If you've been waiting in silence, here's what you need to know. You're not forgotten. You're being formed. God's silence doesn't mean He's ignoring you. It means he's doing something deeper than your current comfort. He's stripping away the noise, the emotional crutches, the need for constant signs, so he can give you something better, confidence in his character, not just his answers. This is hard, I know, but it's holy, because when the silence breaks, when he finally speaks again, you'll know the voice, not because it's loud, but because you've learned to listen with your heart. Do you remember Elijah? He was a prophet who had seen fire fall from heaven. He had heard God's voice loud and clear, but when fear came, when Jezebel threatened his life, he ran. He hid in a cave, exhausted, alone, and it was there, in the stillness, God met him. Not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a whisper, a gentle whisper. Sometimes we look for God in the dramatic. We expect him to thunder through the chaos, but more often than not, he speaks through the quiet. Because it's in the quiet that your heart softens. It's in the stillness that your ears open. It's in the silence that your roots go deep. If you feel like you're in a cave right now, don't curse the silence. Lean into it. Listen for the whisper. God may not be speaking how you expect, but he is still speaking. Just quieter, closer, and always with love. Silence is not punishment, it's preparation. We think God is distant when he's quiet, but what if he's just drawing closer in a different way? What if the silence is the soil where trust grows? Think about it. When someone walks with you in silence, they don't have to speak to prove they care. Their presence is the proof. That's how God walks with you. He's not trying to make you anxious by going silent. He's giving your soul space to breathe, to reflect, to remember what's already true. Because real faith isn't built on constant reassurance. It's built in the tension between what you feel and what you know. You may feel forgotten, but you know you are not. You may feel uncertain, but you know he is steady. And sometimes you need silence to remember what's already been said. His past faithfulness is the anchor for this present quiet. The silence might be long, but it's never wasted. Because in the silence, something deep happens. Your faith detaches from feeling and attaches to truth. You stop needing signs to believe. You stop relying on emotion to feel secure. You start standing on the unshakable character of God. That's maturity. That's growth. God isn't trying to distance himself from you. He's inviting you into deeper intimacy, one that isn't based on constant proof, but on relationship. You're not being ignored. You're being invited to sit with him, to learn the rhythms of his heart, to trust that when he's silent, he's still good. Because sometimes God doesn't change your circumstance. He changes you within it. And that change often begins in the quiet. In the silence, your ears become sharper, not to the noise of the world, but to the whisper of heaven. It's there you begin to hear differently, not always through words, but through peace, through clarity, through moments that feel simple but sacred, a walk that steadies your heart, a verse that lands exactly when you need it, a quiet reminder that you are still held. These are not coincidences. They are the language of God in the quiet. Elijah didn't hear God in the wind, the fire, or the earthquake. He heard him in a whisper. Why? Because whispers are reserved for those who are close. God's silence isn't distance. It's an invitation to lean in, to draw near, to listen not with ears but with your heart. This is how trust is built, not through noise, but through nearness. When you're in the quiet with God, you're not being punished, you're being prepared. The silence isn't a void, it's a workshop, where God forms things in you that noise could never teach, like patience, like dependence, like peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from surrender. You begin to realize faith built in silence isn't fragile. It's not shallow. It's strong, deep, rooted. because it was tested without proof. Sometimes we want answers so quickly, but God knows answers without intimacy can become idols, and so He waits. And in His waiting, He invites, not into fear, not into striving, but into stillness. Because stillness sharpens your spirit, and in that stillness, you hear again, not always the voice you were expecting, but the presence you needed. The silence also exposes what we trust most. Do we trust the feeling of God's presence or the truth of His promise? Feelings fluctuate. They rise and fall like waves, but God's promise, that stands. He said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." He didn't say, "You'll always feel me." He said, "I'll always be there." And this is where silence becomes sacred. It strips away the noise, the rush, the performance, and all that's left is you and Him, not your good works, not your answers, not your emotions, just faith and grace and the God who never moves. Sometimes you don't need more signs. You just need to stay. Stay when it's quiet. Stay when it's unclear. Stay when it feels like nothing is changing. Because in the staying, your roots grow deep, and deep roots hold fast when the storm finally comes. There's a reason trees grow their roots deep before they reach high. Without hidden strength, they'd fall in the wind. God works the same way with us. He builds in silence what we'll need in the storm. You may not realize it now, but something is forming in the quiet. Resilience, conviction, a still kind of courage, the kind that doesn't depend on miracles, but on knowing who He is, even when He's quiet. And one day, you'll look back on this season and realize it wasn't wasted. It wasn't God abandoning you. It was Him growing you, rooting you, refining you for something bigger than you knew how to ask for. This silence, it's not a punishment. It's preparation. So don't run from it. Let it do its work. Let it clear the clutter in your soul until the only thing left is trust. And that's where real faith lives. And maybe that's where you are right now. Not angry, not rebellious, just tired. Tired of trying to hear God and getting silence. Tired of hoping for answers and watching days go by without them. Tired of feeling like you're doing everything right and still stuck in the same place. But what if the silence isn't punishment? What if it's God preparing your soul for something weightier than a quick reply? God doesn't waste silence. He uses it like a gardener uses winter, not as neglect, but as preparation. The roots grow deep in stillness. The branches may look bare, but beneath the surface, life is strengthening. This isn't God pulling away, it's Him pulling you inward. It's in these silent seasons that your faith becomes more than words, more than Sunday mornings, more than borrowed conviction. It becomes yours, personal, hard-earned, real. And that kind of faith, it can survive anything. So if you're sitting in silence, stay. Don't rush to escape. Don't reach for noise to distract yourself from the quiet. Stay. Let it do its work. Let it form something in you that comfort never could. God is not absent. He's just working in ways you don't yet see. And when He speaks again, and He will, it won't just be to your ears. It will be to your spirit, your identity, your story. The silence is not the end. It's the middle, the place where God is shaping you for what's next. One day the silence will break, but not like a door slammed open, not with noise or drama. It'll happen quietly, gently, maybe through a verse you've read 100 times, suddenly breathing new life. Maybe through a conversation you didn't expect, or a moment so small, only your soul recognizes it as holy. And in that moment, you'll understand why the silence mattered, because through it, you learned to listen differently. You learned to trust, not because you saw, but because you knew. You stopped treating God like a vending machine and started walking with Him like a companion. You stopped needing constant affirmation to believe He was still with you. You started to see that silence was never distance, it was depth. And that kind of closeness, that's what holds you steady when life shakes. So if you're still waiting for God to speak, keep waiting. Not as punishment, not with fear, but with expectation. Because silence doesn't mean He's not working. It means He's preparing you for something worth the wait. And in the stillness, in the quiet, in the space where your heart stays open despite the ache, He is near. You're not being ignored, you're being formed. And the one who started this story in you, He will finish it.